The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to APQC's webinar, KM in 2020, Innovation in the Face of Disruption of 2020. Today's presentation will be from APQC's Executive Director of Client Solutions, Cindy Hubert, and KM Principal Research Lead, Lauren Trees. Before we get started, just a few things to keep in mind. You can tweet about today's webinar using the hashtag KMAPQC. All lines are in listen-only mode, but if you have questions, you can enter those to the right of your screen in the Q&A window for us to respond to later. There will be time at the end of today's webinar to address any questions that have come in. You will also receive a follow-up email no later than this coming Monday with links to the slides and the full recording from today's webinar. And now I'll turn this presentation over to Lauren to get us started.
Thanks so much, Zakia. And I suspect most of us are in a strange, disconcerting place this week. And that certainly goes for me putting together a webinar entitled Innovation in the Face of Disruption. We've been working on the research that I'm going to share today since November, but I assure you I had no desire to be this prescient. And as unprecedented as this global COVID-19 crisis is, the jarring changes that we're experiencing right now are actually something that we have been practicing for without knowing it. We live in a world and in a business environment defined by disruption and rapid evolution. And that was true last year, and it was true last month, and it will continue to be true for the foreseeable future, I suspect. So recognizing that, here at APQC, we surveyed nearly 200 KM professionals this January and February to understand more about how KM is grappling with and responding to various kinds of disruptions and changes in the workplace. And one of the questions we asked people was to rate the level of change in their organizations on a simple 1 to 5 scale. From 1 is mostly status quo, low level of change, to 5 is a mind-boggling level of change on nearly every front. And as you can see on this slide, 61% rated their organization's level of change at either a 4, which is major simultaneous change initiatives, or a 5, which is that mind-boggling level of change on nearly every front. So we may be in uncharted waters, but most of you are no strangers to rapid change and rolling with the punches.
Lauren, I'd love to ask this question today. So, you know, I think the thing that is so different for me in thinking about changes in the situation we are in now, we just don't have a choice. Right? And I think that that is an even more significant opportunity if you're on your game with KM. And I'll tell you personally, it just felt so good to do this webinar with our KM community today because it felt normal. So keep that theme in mind as we go through this.
Absolutely. And I'm going to talk a bit today about the changes that are impacting KM, the disruption side of this equation. But I think we really want to zero in on the other side, the response in the form of innovation and solutions. We want to get from problem to solution, right, Cindy? And once we have our little mini panic attack, we do, you know, what we do to navigate disruption and help our colleagues and our organizations through it, because that's the only way we're going to get through things like this. So even though we're going to talk about a range of disruptions today, not just pandemic, this feels like a good topic to be focused on. And I agree, Cindy, it's good to be with colleagues and doing something that feels a little bit normal.
Absolutely. We're living, I like to say, living on the Texas Gulf Coast all my life. When hurricanes hit us, it's always called the cone of uncertainty. And I think that's where we're really falling now. And if you don't mind me just to do a public service announcement and get it out of the way, as you guys can imagine, those of you, we were set to have our 2020 KM conference at the end of April, beginning of May. And like all of you, we are in that kind of uncertainty. We are making decisions and working through the many details, and we will be informing you as soon as possible on what we're going to do. But the good news is we're embracing our theme from disruption to innovation and really using this to think out of the box and think of very different ways to be able to collaborate with you, our KM community, ensure we capture and preserve the great content that was been, and also have some opportunity to collaborate. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. And before we get started, we've been hearing, both Cindy and I, from a lot of our KM members about different interventions and things that they're doing to help support the organization through the COVID-19 pandemic. So I wanted to start off by just asking all of you on the call, is your KM team or effort doing anything specific that you wouldn't otherwise normally be doing, whether you're doing more of something or changing direction a little bit to different activities to support your organization during the pandemic? So yes, definitely, maybe you're thinking about it, hoping to, but you're still kind of figuring that out, or maybe you're not. So this is a pretty simple question. We'll just give you guys a few seconds to vote, and then when we get to a critical mass, Zakiya will close the polling, and we'll look at those results. And I'm curious, I don't want to sway the results here, but I suspect a lot of people are in that middle ground where they're still figuring it out. But we have heard from an amazing number of our members who are in that yes, definitely category. They woke up day 1, day 2, day 3, figuring out what they can do to support the organizations, and that warms my heart.
Absolutely. Lauren, we're going to share some things as we go through your slides today and the data, because there's just there's some phenomenal things that people are doing, and some just real logical, nonsensical things just to remind our audience of, right?
So Zakiya, can we go ahead and close the poll and we'll show the results?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at that.
So almost all of you, 9 out of 10, are either doing something or you're hoping to and still trying to figure it out. So I think that's great, and hopefully what we talk about today will give you some ideas, some inspiration as we move forward in thinking about what you can do and maybe some ways to support the organization that you haven't thought about, because everybody's approaching this a little bit differently. Okay, great. So I'm going to roll into our agenda for today, and hopefully I can get the slide to advance for me.
Our systems are all overloaded. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about this really in 3 parts. The first is around adopting new technology and thinking about digital disruption and how that's impacting KM, and also how technology can help us react to change, adapt to rapid change cycles, and things like that. And then the second area we're going to talk about is thinking less about technological change and more about different types of business and workforce changes. Some of the techniques and methodologies we're seeing out there to help organizations just be more agile, lowercase agile, uppercase agile, and also the skill sets that KM needs to achieve success in the current change environment. And then finally, we can't be on this webinar today without talking about the current crisis and the current global situation that we're in, what we see as KM's role right now, and some tips and advice and ideas for what other organizations are doing. And I hope that today will be the start of a conversation about that we will continue to help all of you benchmark with each other and share best practices as we all try to navigate our way through the current disruptions. So adopting new technology, we're going to start by talking about technology, because when I think about disruptive change in organizations more broadly, not this week, but the last few years, technological change is often a big part of that. And what we found on our survey is that the vast majority of KM programs are having to respond to expansive technology initiatives across the business. So not necessarily KM technology, but IT shifts that affect KM tools and approaches, that affect the kind of knowledge that the business needs, and how that knowledge flows between people and systems. A majority of our KM audience says that digital transformation and business process automation are having a major impact on KM in their organizations. And then nearly a third of you, which I was impressed with, I think this is really taking off, say that business-focused AI implementations are also having a major impact on KM. And earlier, Cindy was kind of talking about, change you choose versus change that's thrust upon you, and we've been talking about that a lot recently. At least some of the technology change that KM has been experiencing is not a choice. It is a business reality that KM has to adapt to, and that's just where we are. So the paradox of emerging technology, at least from my perspective, is that it can be a disruptor, and anyone who's lived through a digital initiative can attest to this. But it's also a tool that can help us cope with disruption, cope with change. And for any of you whose workforce has gone all virtual, you're probably living that right now. If you've made big digital investments, you're likely reaping the rewards of that in terms of efficient, effective virtual access to knowledge and work. And if you haven't made those investments yet, you may be wishing that you had. So, I think organizations that have been through some of this disruption now can see technology's impact on the response. So that part at least is good if we're looking for silver linings. And when I look at the adoption curve for knowledge management or knowledge technologies, I really see the disruption happening in two waves. And the first focuses on moving both content and collaboration to the cloud, and closely associated with that is access through mobile apps and devices. And this wave is pretty mature at this point. Almost half of you have broadly implemented cloud-based KM, and most of the rest are either piloting or experimenting. And the move to the cloud has been painful for many organizations. It requires some fundamental shifts in how we work and how we manage knowledge. But hopefully we're close to getting over the hump there. That's my hope, at least. And then after this first wave, we don't see a lot of broad implementation of any technology. All of the technologies that I've listed here have fewer than 10% of organizations have broadly implemented them. But we are seeing KM programs piloting and experimenting with a range of technologies, whether that's cognitive search, artificial intelligence, auto classification, various forms of content and colleague recommendation systems, and down the line. I did not even include all of them here because my slide is not long enough. And it's a long list, but I will say almost all of them are about finding stuff. And most of us, I think, are still dealing with this explosion of content and knowledge artifacts of various forms. And the cloud doesn't fix that. It mostly just makes it easier to share and save stuff. So we're trying many strategies to improve search and discovery. And the good news about the cloud is that it gives us access to networked data and more computing power to fuel some of these more sophisticated technological solutions, like AI, like Netflix, like content recommendations. So a lot of experimentation, people are throwing spaghetti at the wall, but I suspect in the next year or two, we're gonna see this situation environment converge on a smaller set of second wave capabilities with a critical mass of KM programs broadly implementing them.
Lauren, I have to pick up on something you just said. You said something I think that is so profound, I don't want our audience to let it go by. You said almost all of these are about finding stuff. And so here's some advice for you all, and I'm speaking from a personal perspective. We're always into improving search here at APQC for our members on our website. Lauren's been very involved with that, and we are partnering hugely with our IT group as just really working with them. And so I'm learning a lot of things about search that I thought, oh, I'm not a geeky IT person. I don't need to know all of this, but you do, because you need to be smart about the technological capabilities because you've got to be able to say, are they structured the way they're supposed to make it work? And you get to ask those questions that are very practical from the user's experience to say, shouldn't these two words bring up this? And you can get to the heart of technological issues if you will engage yourself as a KMer. So don't be afraid of these. It's about finding stuff. It's about making it easier, making a great experience. And it really does help your IT partner look at things differently. That's what I'm seeing. And we're having a great experience here, Lauren and I, with our IT gurus.
Yeah, it's like, what is that old commercial? I'm not just the hair club president, I'm also a client. Cindy and I research this stuff, but we also, we also live it. And so we understand some of the challenges, and we also see the power of those partnerships.
Absolutely.
And then we also asked on our survey about technologies to help KM respond to change. Of all these technologies that you're implementing and experimenting with and planning to implement, what do you think are going to be the most influential in terms of, changing the environment and helping the organization respond to change, address, evolving needs? And you can see that the majority of people are focused still on the cloud. And I think, people need seamless access, and we're living the most extreme business case of that right now. But you can see the impact of that in a crisis, in a disruptive situation. And then in terms of these second wave technologies that we're talking about, the most influential tools are things like auto classification, recommendation systems, cognitive search. And I think that plays into what we've been saying about innovating our way to findability. It's a critical problem, a wicked problem that we as knowledge management need to solve, and we are trying to innovate our way through that.
Absolutely.
So now that we've gotten the technology talk out of the way, I want to dig into some of the other more systematic changes that the KM teams and programs are responding to, because I think that while there's been a lot of focus on digital disruption, some of this has not gotten the attention that maybe it deserves and requires. So first of all, we're seeing massive changes in the organizations that KM supports. And I don't think this will be a surprise to any of you, but leadership changes, big strategy shifts, reorganizations, recalled business models are all having a major impact on KM. And when it comes to the business models and things like that, digital does play a role here. But also, if you look at the second from the bottom here, large-scale shifts in the market and in customer needs. I suspect if we reissued this survey today, we'd have a lot more people saying that major impact to KM in that category. So you realize how fluid some of these changes are and how much a category that wasn't a major impact on KM last month can start to be a major impact on KM. And then mergers, acquisitions, and spinoffs don't shake up as many KM programs just by the nature of it, but it's still almost half seeing either a major or minor impact here. And the effect on the impacted programs is absolutely massive. Cindy and I have both seen that with our members. So just something to be aware of. But it's really a wide range of strategic and structural changes that, that KM has to grapple with and figure out how to support the organization through. And then we're action in the business. We've been mostly on the growth side recently, but I suspect KM is going to be called in to deal with some knowledge loss from things like layoffs and early retirement packages in the coming months, unfortunately, as well as responding to demographic shifts in the workforce, and boomers retiring, millennials, Gen X moving into leadership roles, Gen Z moving into the workforce. That's been a topic for more and more KM leaders that I've talked to. As the makeup of the workforce changes and that demographic mix, that has implications for how employees interact with KM technology, want to collaborate, the kinds of support that you need to put in place, all sorts of different things that you have to think about.
Lauren, I have to go on a little tangent here about the generations for a minute. I had the pleasure of joining the U.S. Navy Carrier Team 1 at their winter meeting at the end of February, and they come together focused on knowledge sharing, collaboration, and learning. They had a representative there that spoke from the Center for Generational Kinetics. And she shared so many things, but a couple of points that she made that I think are really relevant to this particular data set that you're showing. She talked a lot about generations, what creates a generation, not only people that are born around the same time frame, but that are born and raised around a certain place, geography, and culture. There's a lot of ways to look at and best understand a generation, but to best understand it is to look at trends and influence that shape them. And she gave the top two. Number one was parenting. It's an indicator of how you're going to go on to behave in the marketplace, career expectations, how to communicate, even handshakes. Now, boy, things like our disruptive forces today have changed that. But number two, Lauren, not surprisingly, is technology, because it shapes the way you experience the world. And of course, 2-year-olds have no issues with FaceTime. It's just a natural thing for them. But the point of all this is that these differences, you want to be able to embrace, because you have to understand them to be able to shape the connections and collaborations for your audience and for your communities. You're going to have the best of each generation to accomplish a mission these days. And so the difference is, we should embrace those. Yes, they're disruptive, the way we communicate, problem solve, because they're shaped by these different experiences and the way that we, look at things. But it was, it's important to embrace all those. And she then said one more thing that I thought was really good for us as KMers. Data drives a lot of strategies. And she was saying that in her work, the problem is a lot of times people think they have the right data and they don't. And she used an example saying, who is the #1 buyer of frozen pizza? Now, think about that, audience, for just a minute. Who is the #1 buyer of frozen pizza? You want to type it in, you can. I'll quiz Lauren. Lauren, who do you think it is?
I'm going to guess everyone, given that people are hoarding frozen food right now. But in general, I'm gonna guess young people, college students.
That would have been my thought, but the data shows that it's moms 35 to 45 who work out 3 times per week. So when you go into your strategies, especially for the frozen pizza market, you need to think about these things. They're looking for healthy, ease of frozen, something unique and different that is going to be good for their family. So my point to you all is, and Lauren, just embracing this, I think that's where we have to have context and understanding. Data helps us do that as we prepare for times like these, and keeping our people just communicated with, connected, and collaborating, because those are really big deals, right? So thanks for letting me go on the tangent. Thought it was good.
Now I'm just thinking about, gosh, I wish I had some frozen pizza. I didn't pick any of that up at HEB. So.
Go find moms in your neighborhood, 35 to 40.
There we go. Maybe they have some toilet paper I could have too. So I think that as we look at all of these changes, it really requires a mix of new innovative techniques and methodologies, and also returning to some tried and true ones that we may have lost focus on or just need to make sure that we keep top of mind. And KM is absolutely adopting new and trendy techniques and methodologies. Nearly a third of KM teams have broadly implemented agile project management. Nearly a quarter have broadly implemented design thinking. And then for things like customer journey mapping and advanced analytics, to your point earlier, Cindy, the broadly implemented numbers are a little smaller, but we're seeing a lot of organizations, a lot of KM teams experimenting with and piloting those, trying to get things off the ground. And hopefully more programs will work out the analytics piece, because that seems so vital to anticipating, reacting to, and demonstrating value in the midst of change. We've seen that with, anecdotally at least, with so many KM programs that we've worked with through these kinds of big transformational changes. And all this data was interesting to me. I was like, yep, that makes sense, agile, design thinking. But I think the part that I found a little bit more, I don't know if surprising, but I did have an aha moment, was that the top techniques, not just for being broadly implemented, but that KM programs are piloting and experimenting with, are knowledge mapping and the identification of critical knowledge, along with formal change management. And neither of these are particularly new or particularly trendy, but obviously KM programs that haven't embraced them or have lost focus on them over time are reinvesting and reinvigorating their efforts to, first of all, understand where critical knowledge resides across the organization and where it needs to flow. And then secondly, to support end users and end user groups as they attempt to learn new tools and adopt new behaviors in the midst of all of this chaos. And I think that that's really powerful and a testament to some of these tried and true methodologies that we all know are important and know work, but sometimes we can shift focus over to, what everybody's writing about in the Harvard Business Review and things like that, and we can lose focus a little bit. And then just following up on this, when we ask which techniques and methodologies will be most influential in helping KM respond to the current changes and meet evolving organizational needs, that's where we see this huge rallying cry for mapping and pinpointing critical knowledge, along with change management, advanced analytics, and design thinking and things like that. But if you look at this, 70% of people who participated in our survey listed knowledge mapping and the identification of critical knowledge in their top two approaches that are going to help KM respond to change. I think that's really powerful.
Lauren, I was thrilled to see this, honestly, because I love all the new approaches. I think they give us new ways to look at it. I think our audience is very interested in using new things because it lets you be innovative, right? But what I want to be, I think we need to be clear of the asset we support. And I think sometimes we say all the time, knowledge management has to embrace these new things, but you also have to keep your own personality. So always stay tried and true to the knowledge, to the asset you support, and understanding what fuels it. And knowledge mapping can help you really dig into that. And then I think when you add the change on there, what the reality is, the engagement and people participating in the processes, approaches, using the tools we have is what makes the knowledge move. And so if you just keep those fundamentals together, you can do all kind of new wild and crazy things. We could play jacks together and probably make it a knowledge activity. You know what, Lauren? Hang on.
No, this might be a generational moment here.
It is. They're balls and little spiky things that you bounce the ball and pick up jacks. And it's a fun little game that we can maybe get together and play when we get clearance to get closer than 6 feet.
That does not sound like a good social distancing game, Cindy. But with the other piece that I was thinking about and looking at these results is how powerful having a good knowledge map in front of you can be when everything shifts under your feet. And we've seen this at various organizations that we've worked with, that have had really good knowledge maps in place, and then, a new CEO or new organizational leader comes in and completely changes the strategy. You're able to, you know where your critical knowledge resides, where it needs to go, and as those business processes change, as the strategic priorities change, then you can reroute those maps to make sure that KM is prioritizing the right things, and that what knowledge is now critical. It really is a tool that, even though a knowledge map is a snapshot in time, helps you as things change. And I think that's maybe a paradox that not everyone understands, that, well, if everything's changing, why do I need to map it? Well, you need to know where you were yesterday so that when things change, you can figure out where you need to be today. And that's really foundationally important.
Absolutely. And that foundation really helps you build on innovation. You will impress your new leaders with a knowledge map to show them that you know where these assets are and what's important.
Absolutely. So all of this brings us to the current moment. Oh no, I wanted to talk about one more thing. I almost forgot. So, as a final question on our survey, we asked about the skills that KM teams need to develop to respond to change and meet these evolving needs. And I think it's no surprise that change management tops this list. We also see a focus on building analytics and data management skills for those advanced analytics techniques. And to your point earlier, Cindy, about the search issue, we don't see a lot of KM programs think that they need programming skills or deep IT skills, but they do need to be able to understand the technology and especially understand data and analytics so that they understand the the basics behind some of these algorithms that will get you to cognitive search, to better results, to things like that. You have to understand a little bit about how that works so that you can represent your end user in those conversations and make sure that you're getting the right things out. And then also continued focus on strategic problem solving. You need people who can think and solve problems in the midst of change because, I think a lot of these, paper pushing routine jobs are going away. You need people who can think for themselves and are empowered to make decisions and good at that. And then finally, the part that computers will never replace, the interpersonal skills, the active listening, communication, and all of that is deeply connected to good change management as well. And all of those foundational skills kind of came out ahead of what I think of as some of the more narrower skills around things like facilitation and project management and design thinking and things like that. People are really looking broadly at what they need.
Yeah, Lauren, I think one thing that struck me about this slide, so, people always come and say, oh, we're using ADKAR, ProC, we've got great change management methodologies. I'm so supportive of that. I think you need that and it gets you started. But look at all of these things underneath. These are just strategies or tactics, if you want to call them, that support those change management things. Because to hand somebody a 4-step methodology, that doesn't really fire them up. To help them learn how to tell a story gets them very excited, and the power of the story. The one thing that I was a little bit disappointed, Lauren, I'll tell you, that I didn't see on here was more around measuring the value, showing value, because people who've known me for years say, I think that is one of the best change tools you can use. Even it's something simple that shows a value path that says we're doing these things for knowledge management, they're impacting this, and we can see some, impact or value that's happening to this. And it just connects, the story help connects it.
Well, and people who are putting analytics and data management on this list may be thinking about it in that context. It's not just how you think about data for your search algorithms and things like that, but also how you think about KM data and how you analyze that and correlate it and present it to leadership. So I think if you have those data skills in combination with the storytelling skills and the communication skills that we're talking about here, then hopefully you can put a good story forward, business case for your continued expansion and value to the organization.
Absolutely. Take a snapshot of this slide, everyone. You're going to need all of these things to get through the next few weeks, at home and at work.
Well, I think that is the perfect segue. I was so excited to talk about this. The current moment and specifically what we can extrapolate from our research and our experience to help and support all of you as you forge up a good path for KM right now. And Cindy and I had the great pleasure to host a KM advanced benchmarking group last year. You may have heard us talk about that. And one of the things that we asked them in that 2-day meeting was, what got you through the hard times when things were crazy and change was constant, when you were in the middle of multiple mergers, all those sorts of things? Because who we had in the room were real KM veterans. And it was really interesting hearing them share what got them through the hard times. And one of the most pervasive things that we heard was you have to align to the current reality. The most important thing for KM when you started off the year and all of your strategic planning may all of a sudden not be your top priority. You can't fall in love with your plan. You can't fall in love with your program. You have to be, ready to triage and say what needs to happen to keep knowledge flowing, to keep work happening right now based on what we know at the current moment. And then how can the KM team redeploy and stretch to help the organization address the current most urgent problems? And it's funny, Cindy, you were talking about business value. People call me all the time to ask for some sort of calculus problem formula to show their business value. You know what? This is how you show value. Don't get so caught up in proving your value in a math equation that you forget to be valuable in these crisis moments. I think that that is absolutely, if you take one thing away today, that would be it.
It is, Lauren. You have a bunch of stories coming up, and we'll share some things. I've had the honor of being on the phone with a lot of our members over the last couple of weeks, and just everything's just going crazy, guys. We're all living through it, doing things that we never thought we'd have to deal with. But I do want to stress a couple of points that Lauren made. So you do have to mirror what's going on in the business, and it's kind of interesting. We're all dealing with some very similar things in this moment of time. But I also want to remind you, so I do think you have to mirror the face, but because of our 25 years of maturity in KM, I want you to broaden your thinking. Because when Lauren says stretch to help the organization address, they're not thinking of things the same way you are. They're not looking at it through the same lens. So make sure you are bringing those innovative ideas, get them out there, and not only get them out there, but have a pretty good idea of how they will work. How can you make this work? And you're going to really get your businesses partnering with you at this moment in time. So yeah, it's time.
Brainstorm and be that engine of innovation and positive thinking. I think that is so crucial right now. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. One of the most obvious ways that KM can help the organization is by supporting all of these employees who are suddenly and unexpectedly transitioning to all remote work for an undefined period of time. And that changes their knowledge needs and how they interact and collaborate, and they may need KM in new and different ways than they did last week. Ironically, Cindy and I are actually veterans of this kind of transition. After the Hurricane Harvey in 2017, the APQC building was flooded, and the whole office shifted on a dime to remote work for several months. And it's a little scary, but we are here to tell you that it can be done. And we would never wish a hurricane or a pandemic on anyone, but it does change how you work, and in some ways it is an opportunity to build better knowledge sharing behaviors across the workforce, and that's just the reality of it. We've lived that. And the first piece, your KM support isn't fundamentally different from what you usually do, but it's supporting people at their teachable moment, which is, where they have an urgent need to learn something and they're particularly receptive in this case to what KM has to offer. So there are many different components to this. I think the first one is really foundational. Just make sure everyone knows what's out there and the tools that are available to them, how to access documents, how to find experts and colleagues, how to connect and collaborate virtually, all of those basic things. And then as part of that, you may want to offer managers and facilitators, some specialized coaching on setting up virtual meetings, running virtual meetings, setting up and using collaboration sites. Even if some of that technology is out of KM's usual purview, if you see a gap that's a need in the organization that, maybe nobody else is filling, that's something that KM can do and provide some coaching and support around, because most KM programs are qualified to do that, even if it's not sort of in their technical job description. Remind everyone how to find stuff in your online repositories and systems, because you may have people who you've been communicating with about this for a year or 2 or 10 who still lean over the cubicle wall and ask their colleagues these questions. But if they're all of a sudden working remotely, they may need to have those refreshers about how to access that information in a systems environment, a virtual environment. And then finally, your managers, your experts, your HR people are going to be overloaded with questions. So encourage people to ask those questions in communities of practice, team chat threads, or wherever other people are going to be able to see those answers and benefit from them, and your experts and your leaders can answer the question once and then just point people to those answers rather than having to address the same questions over and over again on email and private forums and things like that. So all kind of good hygiene behaviors for KM that become more and more important, and maybe have a different connotation in the current context.
Lauren, these are so good. I want to build on a couple of you said, and then I want to remind you all, when Lauren and I started preparing for this community call, of course, all of this was going on, and we had all this great new data and research that we wanted to share with you all. And, I always say, always look back over your shoulder to remember. And some of us were in the working world in 2001, 9/11. Now, that didn't impact the entire world. It certainly was a world event. This is actually impacting the entire world. But we learned so much. At that time, we launched some research that was focused on virtual teams and collaboration of all things. And Lauren, we didn't have half the tools, almost 20 years ago that we have now and the capabilities. So, but there was a very interesting framework that I think would serve us all well to think about. And that was just the dependency of human interaction and then the routine and non-routine tasks. We looked at it that. And we looked at collaboration a little bit more broadly, and we focused on communication, connection, and collaboration as three separate elements. And as you've talked today, I think that's what a great framework, whether it's mental or you write it down, to think about in helping your organization. And I'm going to go back to just helping senior leaders know what, helping them. So they could use some help with messaging right now. I mean, they have great stuff coming out. I know right now the window is open for knowledge sharing, both internally and externally. You all have shared wonderful things with us of what you're doing. We've passed it on. We're trying to compile it. I'm sure Lauren's going to come up with some great articles with her team on all of this, and it's going to make us even better. But help them with their messaging. Be very specific, because that's a big communication piece, and people need to be eased so that we can stay normal and things feel good and we can get work done. And the little accomplishments mean a lot. I also think when you start talking about connections and collaboration, I mean, remember, collaboration, the root word of that is co-laboring together. I learned that from Larry Prusak, Lauren, years ago. That means you work together, right? This is not social stuff. You work together. And the social enables us now, right? But think about if you really do have people who need to be transferring deep knowledge that are in your R&D centers, they're in your engineering and they're doing designs. Make sure that they have the techniques and the templates they need to have that brainstorming, to solve problems, to capture that insight, job descriptions that are project descriptions that get really insightful, and they're doing it real time using collaboration tools. That's the one thing we don't have to create now these days, because we've got great collaboration tools. It's just how you put them together. So the things we're getting, Lauren, from people are just very specific things like that. Somebody sent me the other day a template to say, here's how we're capturing, real insights and sharing them real time. And it's just, it helps people in this teachable moment, because our window is open for that right now.
Yeah, the other piece I was thinking about, looking at the adoption curve for cloud platforms for content and collaboration, I think a lot of organizations have recently broadly implemented those, or they're in some kind of pilot phase. They're transitioning into those platforms. And people may be sticking files in those platforms, but not really using the true collaborative power of those platforms to work together. And this may be an opportunity to accelerate incorporate some of that work so people learn just those simple things about, how to, at people and work together in a document, really basic things that people aren't necessarily comfortable with. And, as these kinds of changes are thrust upon them, what do I use the wiki page in my Microsoft Teams for and things like that? If you have some clear guidance and really are there to help and support people and reduce the chaos and help them feel a sense of order, because I think that's part of it, is people feel very disoriented when they go to all remote work. So if you can create a virtual workplace that feels organized and they know what to do and where to go and what to do there, that can have a huge psychological impact as well.
Absolutely. Take the knowledge flow process. Do not put off your content management efforts any longer. Go find someone that's struggling, help them get organized quickly. You can learn from that and expand and scale. It's a great time to do these things.
And then, so we kind of talked about nudging people and reminding them how to use the tools that you already have. In addition to that, you may have some new and different or more vigorous actions that you want to take. And this is not an exhaustive list that I'm going to share, nor are all of them relevant to every KM program. But they're things to think about and things that different KM leaders have told us that they are working on. The first is really creating some kind of central hub or clearinghouse for the latest information and updates. So employees have one place to go, and you can link to other sources and repositories, but if there's one place, one link that people know they can get the most updated information about policies and what's going on with the organization in light of the pandemic, and that can really reduce the burden of questions and answers that are going on, free up people's time for other types of work, and create some clarity and consistency across the organization, which is, it's simple, but it's really powerful. So if you own the internet, if you own a platform, if you own the wiki, maybe that's something you want to talk to your leaders about doing. The second one is really, if employees are not used to remote work, you may want to clarify some rules of the road for virtual presence and virtual collaboration. And I think this is backed up by the research, but also from our own experience at APQC. When you move people from a face-to-face environment to an all virtual environment, they're not sure what are the expectations. If somebody chats me, do I have to write back immediately, or can that wait 30 minutes? And especially in the current environment where lots of people are caring for children who are out of school, who are caring for family members who may be ill, or just a lot of craziness and uncertainty going on in people's lives. Being really clear about what the expectations are in terms of productivity, how they balance that with the flexibility that they need, how to be responsive in a virtual environment, what needs to go in team chat and what doesn't need to go in team chat, so that you can balance some of the connectivity with the level of distraction and things like that. So a lot of different things to think about, and different organizations are absolutely going to approach it differently. But whatever your approach is, having some clear guidelines for people can be helpful in this moment. The third one is around identifying knowledge loss risks that you can help mitigate. And really, if you have a lot of at-risk knowledge that you haven't captured or transferred, it may be too late in some situations, but there may also be some quick and dirty things that you can do. I was talking to Marisa Brown, who leads our supply chain research, and they're looking at, approvers. Well, what if the approver is out of the office, and the approver's backup is out of the office, and the approver's backup's backup is out of the office? How much redundancy do you have in some of those critical processes? And in terms of, critical knowledge as well, to make sure that those most important things can get done regardless of what happens. And I think that if there's anything you can do in terms of business continuity, and I put that on here, now might be a good time to fill out those job handout documents or to have people update them. And, it's a good moment, and you're likely to have lots of leadership support for things like that. So there may be an element of capitalizing on this moment from that perspective. And then finally, help leaders communicate and set the right tone, make it easy for them. They may not be very comfortable in the virtual environment, so offer them coaching, do the heavy lifting for them as much as possible where you can. And then just have that continuous feedback loop. Don't think you know all the answers. Ask people what they need, listen, and deliver those creative, innovative solutions where possible. That's really the best way to keep things fluid and continue to support the business where it is and give it what it needs. So I wanted to end here with a second poll, and this is a select all that apply. What is your KM team doing in light of COVID-19? Are you creating some kind of virtual hub for answers and updates? Are you offering any kind of refresher training or pointing people to the maybe video training that you already have? Are you offering any specific guidance on collaboration in an all remote workforce? Are you doing any business continuity planning around knowledge risks? Specialized support for leaders and managers. So select all that apply. If you're not doing anything, you don't need to select anything. And if you have anything in the other category, feel free to type that in. I'd love to see what it is. Cindy suggested we are going to be looking at this more closely, writing and thinking about it on our research team, not just in KM, but across all of our research areas. So if you have anything that your organization's doing, or if you're willing to talk to me for 15 minutes, it can be off the record. We don't have to go through an approval process. I really just want to know what different organizations are doing to respond and help their organizations through that, so that we can share some of those good practices and innovative ideas more broadly. So if you're willing to have one of those conversations, please, sometime between now and the end of the call, type a message into the Q&A window, and I'll follow up with you. So hopefully we've given people a little bit of time to vote here. We'll give you a few more seconds and then close the poll and show the results. Oh, really interesting. So a lot of you are providing some guidance on virtual collaboration for the all remote workforce. And a lot of you are looking at kind of setting up one of those virtual hubs. And then the other items maybe a little bit further down the list, but still more than a third of you looking at each of these options. So I think that's great.
Yeah, there's some good things. If you're not doing anything or you were just getting started, this should give you some ideas of where energy is. And Lauren, for those that are doing the virtual collaboration, remember this is a partnership. It's more than just tools. So use that framework. What you trying to just communicate something? You're trying to connect people to do something? Are you trying to get something done working together? Collaboration. And that'll take you really far and help you get them set quickly.
Yeah, and even simple things like, is it okay to put my do not disturb on when I'm doing deep work, and what are the expectations around that? I was in a meeting with Microsoft, last fall, and people were saying everybody's so distracted by Microsoft Teams, and how do you work? And all the people from Microsoft were like, oh, well, we just put our do not disturb on for 3 or 4 hours a day to get our work done, and everyone was like, you can do that, not that they don't know that the button's there, but it's setting up the cultural expectations that it's okay. That doesn't mean, oh, I went off to go watch reruns of The Office on Netflix for 2 hours and I don't want to deal with you. That's, I'm going deep, and here's how to communicate with me if you really need to, but otherwise you're not going to hear from me for a little while. So I think grappling with those things and thinking them through, and empowering people to do what makes sense for their own productivity is really powerful in these moments.
Absolutely.
So that is the end of what Cindy and I wanted to share with you today. I do have some slides on learning more about some of the various topics that we've talked about today. In terms of dealing with disruption, we have the survey summary report from the research that we talked about today, as well as a great white paper on how KM programs survive and thrive in turbulent times, which I would absolutely recommend to all of you. Some information about the future and how you reinvigorate KM programs, We've also got some great resources on disruptive technology around digital transformation, which is a project that our process and performance improvement area and our KM area have been collaborating on. We have some more process-oriented case studies, some more KM-oriented case studies. But if you're interested in the digital side, I highly recommend that, as well as our emerging technologies for knowledge management collection. I included some more foundational information on communication and change management because I think that is an evergreen need as we deal with and respond to different types of change. And then also included a few links on virtual collaboration. We have a lot of information out there. Cindy, when you were talking, I realized I should have included our seamless collaboration content. I didn't hear, but that's some great stuff to go revisit. But I absolutely recommend the resources here, both around virtual collaboration in the cloud and some examples from some of our recent conferences, and from our barriers to knowledge sharing and how you work through distance and some best practices around that. So lots of good ideas. We will continue to share knowledge, and you can help us by telling us what you need and getting in touch with us, and also telling us what you're doing right and what's working and what your lessons learned have been, so that we can hopefully turn that around quickly and share it with the broader membership.
Absolutely. And Lauren, thanks to all of our community members who joined us today. We really appreciate you guys taking your time. We know it's so critical right now that you're doing things for the organization. So we appreciate you spending time with us. And thanks, Lauren, for letting me be your wingman.
I love having you as a wing woman, Cindy. So Zakia, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so at this time, I would like to invite our audience, if you have any questions, please submit those in your Q&A window. And I do want to remind everyone that we will be sending out the webinar slides and the recording. A couple of those questions did come in, so give us a couple of days to get that all settled, and we'll send it out to you. And we had a couple of our friends online that did echo that they are buying frozen pizzas, gluten-free and regular crust. So that's a good thing. And one of the questions that came in, if you could talk a little bit more about the areas of digital transformation that are being focused on. I don't know if you can expand a little bit more there.
Okay, that's a broad question, so I can certainly talk to it. I may not hit exactly where the questioner is looking. We're really looking at the process and knowledge foundation that is required for effective digital transformation. What we're seeing is a lot of organizations pursue discrete digital projects, but not necessarily rolling those up into a cohesive strategy, and also having IT lead different transformation projects without enough, information about the business and the knowledge that needs to flow, in and out of the business. So if you take automation, for example, business process automation and up into intelligent automation, you have to have a pretty good understanding of the foundational processes that you're trying to automate and what knowledge is required at each node of that process in order to automate, even if you're looking at, a robotic process automation based on rules versus an AI based on machine learning and things like that. So it's really about having that partnership with knowledge and process improvement and whoever owns that kind of information in your organization to make sure that what IT is doing in the digital realm, that they're making the right investments, because what they see as high priority may not be high priority for the business or the highest priority for the business. And then as they make those decisions, that, that they're doing it with a good contextual understanding of the processes and knowledge involved.
Absolutely. And Lauren, Zakia, I'm going to build on hers for just a second. Just some words of advice, because KM does not become the digital transformation people. What Lauren said is important. It's the processes and knowledge around it. Make sure you have a solid definition and an understanding of what you're there to do, so that when, quote, you achieve those goals, done, KM is not done, right? It continues on. And don't get caught in that so that people think you're not needed anymore.
But digital is kind of a Rorschach blot. It means different things in different industries. We've been working on a project on digital in the utilities industry, and that looks very different than it does in other types of industries. So it's really industry dependent. Some are focused on things like the Internet of Things. In other industries, that's not a big deal, but you're really focused on AI driven customer service agents and things like that. So the specific technologies that are involved are really going to differ. But what's the same is that you have to understand the business and the knowledge in order to make it work. So that's where those partnerships with whoever's running that, whether it's an enterprise IT or a separate digital office, is critical.
Perfect answer. Thank you so much. So with that, I'd like to end our call today and tell our audience thank you so very much for joining us. Lauren, Cindy, always a pleasure. Thank you for your insights today.
Thanks, everyone, and hope to see you next month.
Have a great one.